Should cities in Harris County become sanctuary cities for the unborn? Do cities have the legal right or even the moral right to restrict access to abortion and abortifacient drugs? Or do we live in a free country, and that means that women should have access to abortions whenever and wherever they are desired? We'll talk about that and much more on today's Theology on Air. Well, I'm Evan McClanahan, I'm the pastor at First Lutheran here in Midtown Houston. I'm joined, as always, usually by Sarah Stone, Outreach
Director for Young Adults
at Memorial Drive Presbyterian Church, ndpc.org or flhouston.org. And we have two special guests. They're going to be doing most of the talking from here on out. But we're joined by Dylan Cumberland and Mark Lee Dixon. And we're looking at the sanctuary city movement for the unborn. You might have heard of sanctuary cities and with regards to something like immigration. Well, it's a similar idea, sanctuary cities for the unborn. And we're really wanting to know how Christians should look at the question of abortion. Both of our guests are Christians. Dylan is politically active. He'll describe how, but he's a Methodist. He favors rights to reproductive health care. Mark Lee Dixon has been described inappropriately by the Huffington Post as like the traveling salesman for the sanctuary city movement. But really the best way to learn what we're talking about is to go, I think, to his website, sanctuarycitiesfortheunborn.com. And basically the idea is that Mark will go to cities and convince city councils to restrict access to abortion and beyond. I'll let him describe it, kind of one city at a time. So before we dig in, just a reminder, HoustonTOT.com. We definitely want to increase our subscribers on YouTube. So if you want conversations like this, we're going to record it on Zoom today, put it on YouTube. It's on Facebook Live right now. Like us on Facebook, HoustonTOT.com. Subscribe to the podcast, Theology on Air. If you want to get this regularly, where you can listen to it in a maybe more easy fashion. Any other announcements?
That's it. Just subscribe away.
Subscribe away.
Subscription
Basically.
fest.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know how this goes. So, Mark, this is kind of your baby, and you're in the affirmative. So usually in a debate situation, the affirmative will go first. So why don't you answer the question for us, right? Which is, should Harris County cities, which are many, there are many cities in Harris County beyond Houston, should they be sanctuary cities for the unborn?
Well, I believe absolutely. Abortion, when I think of the word abortion, I think of the murder of innocent children. And I don't believe that any innocent child should be murdered at all in any of our cities. And over the past couple of years, we have seen a number of people in Harris County sign the online petition. I was reading one from Baytown just a little while ago of someone who said that they want to see Baytown become a sanctuary city for the unborn. I read one last week from Deer Park, someone saying that they want to see Deer Park become a sanctuary city for the unborn. And so it's something that if the people want to see their city outlaw abortion, then I think they need to reach out to their city council members and share what they want to see outlawed. And the same thing would go for if they wanted to see the use of engine brakes on big trucks outlawed in their city, or if they wanted to see candy being thrown out at parades outlawed, or anything else. Every city has the ability to pass ordinances. And if they want to outlaw abortion, I think that's a pretty good thing to outlaw.
Okay. Yeah, it's a broad question. It could apply to any city, right? We could talk about, Bangor, Maine, or I don't know why that came to mind. Juneau, Alaska. But yeah, so the idea is, whether there should be access or not. So, okay, well, Dylan, what do you think? And maybe before we start, I said that you might talk about some of your political engagement. So
yeah,
I
gotcha.
know you mentioned before you worked for Elizabeth Warren's campaign. And things like
yes,
that.
I was a precinct captain for Elizabeth Warren. Maybe one day. Just not this time.
Yeah.
And then I also serve as the lay leader in my local United Methodist Church. I'm very proud of, being United Methodist. We were one of the founders of the National Council of Churches, which still is in favor of women's reproductive health care. Just a fun fact. And so is this the rebuttal portion?
Well, I'm not quite clear on the whole sanctuary cities thing. I mean, it's making it so that people can't have an abortion in a certain city.
Yeah, if you would be so kind as to define
maybe flesh that out a little.
Absolutely. So we're not saying that women can't get an abortion. Because the reality is, if a woman in Deer Park wanted to get an abortion, they're going to go to the Houston clinic anyway. But what the ordinances are saying is that within the city limits of that city, that abortions cannot take place. Now, if a woman within that city wanted to go to Houston to get an abortion, right now she can do so. But as far as what this is saying is that within the city limits of that city, it's not something they want within their city limits. And so, right now, women are going to Houston to get an abortion in that area. Um, but if this ordinance passed, it would say the same. All it would do is saying that in the future, an abortion facility couldn't set up shop in a city like Deer Park if they were the one to pass the ordinance.
I mentioned abortifacients earlier. Does your petition that people could sign through your website, does it include abortifacients as well, like access to RU 486 or something to that effect? Or is it only like say a Planned Parenthood putting a brick and mortar facility?
Which is the morning after pill. I'm only saying because
Yes,
I
right.
did not know what that was. It's the morning
RU
after pill.
486 is the morning after pill, and so called.
for
But
the
I mean,
benefit of our-
aren't there drugs that go beyond a
Well,
day, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Now, the RU 486 is the abortion pill. The Plan B, or what some people call the morning after pill, that's separate. Like you can get Plan B at your local Walmart. And these ordinances do not outlaw the sale of emergency contraception. Now, that in and of itself is a huge discussion. The packages of Plan B, they say that they do not harm an existing pregnancy. But the issue I take with those is that they redefine pregnancy to mean implantation instead of conception. And so I have a huge problem with Plan B. The majority of these ordinances, though, they do not outlaw uh, the use of the selling of Plan B. What they go after are surgical and medical abortions, which would take place in a brick and mortar facility. So that would be the RU 486 medication abortion and also surgical abortions.
Gotcha. So let me ask this then, and then I'll let Dylan, I know, wants to come in, but for more clarity, what really are you trying to achieve, right? If someone from Deer Park can just drive into Houston, what good does it do then for Deer Park to? Is it a kind of a moral stand? Is it a moral victory? Is it just that it's the right thing to do, or do you have a longer range vision with something like that?
Well, it really would help to kind of share a little bit about how this started. So on June 11th, 2019, Wascom City up in Harrison County, population 2,189, became the first city to pass this ordinance outlawing abortion within their city limits. And the reason they passed this ordinance was because an abortion facility in Shreveport, Louisiana, at one time, they had talked about crossing the border to set up shop in Wascom, Texas. In fact, Robin Rothrock, the director of that facility in the early 90s, said it would make sense if abortion was ever shut down in Louisiana for them to cross the border 18 miles to Wascom, Texas. Someone down in the Houston area had actually said they had land in a building for that abortion facility in Wascom, Texas. So when people are talking about having land and a building in that area, that's a big deal. And so when we ended up, we heard some chatter, and there were some concerns there that abortion facility may be looking at crossing the border. Hope Medical Group for Women, they pull from a 200-mile radius as it is. And so the city of Wascom wanted to make sure that that never happened. At the time, Louisiana was the number one most pro-life state in the nation. Texas was at number 17. And so when some people think that abortion access is bad in Texas. Well, we're number 17. Louisiana, the legislation over there is way more stricter than it is here in Texas. And so the abortion industry crossing the border to Texas, that was a possibility. And we wanted to make sure that didn't happen. And so the mayor of Wascom, Texas, said, what can I do? And I said, you need to pass an ordinance outlawing abortion within the city limits. And we ended up giving him that ordinance. We realized it hadn't been done before, and they ended up becoming the first city to outlaw abortion. And since then, there have been other cities that have said, we want to make sure that abortion never comes into our areas. And most recently, one thing that we saw on a national level was that President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris said they wanted to see abortion access in every zip code. They said that on the 48th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Well, if they want abortion access in every zip code, well, what does that mean? How are we supposed to interpret that? And so this is the only way that cities can be proactive and make sure that an abortion facility never sets up shop in their city.
Okay, I want to do two things real fast. One is a technical thing, Mark, and then I have a quick question. So sometimes on our end, Mark, your volume's going like it's getting higher, and you might have like an automatic setting on your microphone or something like that.
Okay.
So I don't know if you go to audio settings by your little microphone on Zoom. Yeah, within Zoom, and there may be a check thing that says automatically adjust microphone volume. I don't know if you have that checked or not. It's kind of right in the middle of the settings on the audio. You know what I'm talking about?
Let me see.
I think maybe your Zoom is trying to correct and it's boosting you and making you louder or something like that. I can edit all this out of the podcast.
I figured you were going to.
Yeah, that was my assumption.
Yeah. But for our live viewers, they might be struggling.
Okay.
To hear
Now it was clicked. This is it
turn it
unclicked.
off. Yeah, turn it off. So
Okay.
Whatever it's just organically coming through your mic will be.
Okay, great.
It won't be overcorrecting.
You're shouting at us. Stop shouting at us.
Too many all caps going on.
Okay.
And the was it the women's clinic? I don't remember the name. Right by Centenary College in Shreveport, by the way.
Hope Medical Group for Women.
Yeah. So I went to Centenary, and
Okay.
Yeah, very very sad place.
And y'all both pronounce Louisiana the same way. It's Louisiana.
No.
But whatever. Let's get back to the
It's
unedited part.
Okay. Dylan is wanting to come in, so please.
Yes.
come on back.
So I was asked to make a little 5-minute thing about my support for women's healthcare. And for me, at least, it's multifaceted. And I have different points, and to a degree, I would like to quiz you on some of them, if that would be all right.
All right.
So my primary support for the women's right to choose is just the basic fact that it's the law. That you had mentioned that the first town to do that did so in 2019, but as you just mentioned, Roe's been the law for over 50 years. From the very beginning of our country, when Abigail Adams asked her husband John to remember the ladies, and he promptly didn't, we've been struggling for women's rights. And so I just have my first question is, how is this legal?
It's literally somebody on Facebook's first question too.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, the reality is that we all have seen Schoolhouse Rock, right? I mean, I know that's kind of old school now.
I can sing you "I'm Just a Bill" if you'd like. I'm
Hey.
not going to, but I can.
kind of want that to happen.
Me too.
When we're off the air, I'll
Okay.
do a little ditty.
So, of course, one of my favorite Schoolhouse Rock videos was that government is a 3-ring circus. And of course, we know that there is an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And there's only one branch of government that makes laws, and that is the legislative branch. And Roe v. Wade in 1973, that was a Supreme Court opinion. The Supreme Court does not have the power and the ability to make laws, nor do they have the ability to repeal laws. The only ones that have that ability is the legislature.
The
So,
Supreme Court retains the right to declare a law unconstitutional, which
Correct.
is why Black people and white people can get married now.
and the Supreme Court, though they can render render a law unconstitutional, that does not remove the law from the books. And so the law still here in Texas, the law still is that abortion is a criminal act. Now, that's on the books here in Texas. That's never been repealed. Last legislative session, I was down in Austin to testify on a bill relating to the abolition of abortion. And someone said, hey, there are people here trying to repeal the sodomy laws that are still in the books here in Texas. Well, they were not successful in repealing those laws. But, it's interesting. Those laws are still on the books here in Texas. Now, there's other laws on the books here in Texas, like in Lubbock. If you're a business owner, you have to own a spittoon. Now, we may say that's a stupid law, but that law is on the books. And the only way that law can be removed is by governmental body. And so I acknowledge the fact that the Supreme Court in 1973 said what they said. However, when we're talking about the law, there are still the pre-Roe statutes have never been removed from the books here in Texas.
Right. Just in the same way that Virginia still has on their books that white people and black people can't get married. It's just also irrelevant now.
Well, when we're talking about law, if the laws are on the books, the laws are on the books. Whether they are enforced or not, they're still there.
Sure. But there are an awful lot of laws that are on the books currently that are, I think all of us here would agree, that are morally abhorrent, more than just abortion. So I just don't understand, just because they're physically on the books, even though our Supreme Court has declared it unconstitutional, that the Supreme Court has still spoken.
Well, the Supreme Court at one time said slavery was okay, and the Supreme Court was wrong. And so what if the Supreme Court is wrong today on the issue of abortion?
That's a fair point, which I think was the entire conservative legal strategy since Ronald Reagan, was to take over the courts, which has effectively happened. If abortion were ruled on now, it probably would be found unconstitutional, maybe, depending on how radical they're feeling. Yet there's also room for democracy as well. There is a majority of people who are in favor of abortion rights, women's reproductive rights. And at the end of the day, we're also a democracy. You're right, we shouldn't be governed by 9 people in robes. We're governed by the majority. And the majority is still currently in favor of women's reproductive health care.
Well, and I would say that we're not even governed by the majority, we're governed by the Constitution of the United States. And the Constitution itself, the Constitution, I believe, is the supreme law of the land. And so we have gotten to believe this lie that the Supreme Court is the supreme law of the land. And that's one thing that I try to encourage people that we've got to get away from this idea of the Supreme Court making laws. The phrases that are used, like the Supreme Court struck down this law, well, they can't really strike down laws. They can rule it unconstitutional, but we really need the legislatures to be the ones that are making laws, leading the way. And I think what's happened is that the legislators have become weak, and they have pushed things off on the Supreme Court when really they're the ones that hold the responsibility, and they're the ones that should be leading the charge on all these issues.
And on that point, you and I do agree.
Now, let me ask you this. What I'm encouraging cities to do, they can very much well do the opposite. And so would you be okay with a city saying, hey, we want to be a sanctuary for abortion. We want to be a sanctuary for abortion access. And would you be okay with that? If cities wanted to pass an ordinance saying that we welcome the abortion industry to our cities, would you support that?
Not particularly, because I feel that has been settled on a federal level. I am in favor of municipalities having more power than they currently do. I obviously disagree with them having power in this way, but I would like to see a return to a devolved government where municipalities and states have more power than the federal government, which isn't really a liberal point, but here we are.
You're such a bad liberal right now.
You know,
Well,
that
let me ask you a question on that. So, I mean, we could be talking about any issue here, not just abortion.
correct.
If a small community, Wascom, Texas is a great example, since they're the first ones to do this anyway. If Wascom, Texas did not want a strip club to come into their city, should they be allowed to say, we do not want that in our community?
That's interesting.
Yeah, no, and I would say yes, because that falls under the purview of a municipality. This has risen to the federal level, and we are now. I felt the same way about gay marriage, that I did not think it was right to have a country where something is celebrated in one state and an abomination in the other. We need to be wholly one or wholly not. And I feel the same way about abortion access, given the fact that it has become so difficult for women to get abortion access. I mean, after all, I think that's part of this ordinance is to not wholesale make it illegal, just to make it incredibly difficult for women to get access to an abortion.
Well, how are we making it difficult for women to get access to abortion? All we're saying is within the city limits, it can't happen here. Now, this actually, when we wrote this ordinance, we wrote it to work within Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, not against those rulings. When most people hear sanctuary city, of course, they think of illegal immigrants. And those cities, what they're doing is they're defying the laws of the land. What we're doing is we're obeying the laws of the land and all the rulings as well, the latest abortion jurisprudence. But what we're saying is we're saying that right here in this city, abortions cannot take place. And that's not taking away abortion access. And so that's working within the undue burden standard of Planned Parenthood versus Casey. We're not creating an undue burden on any woman who's seeking abortion. Right now, I'm speaking to you guys from the Colony, Texas. And if the Colony, Texas chose to outlaw abortion within their city limits, well, is that going to change women going to the Planned Parenthood Surgical Center on John Ryan? No, it's not. Is that going to change women going to Whole Women's Health in Fort Worth? No, it's not. All it's doing is saying that as the industries expand in this city, that's not something they want here in this city.
Can I
Because
throw something into the mix here?
absolutely.
I'm curious. You said there's not an undue burden. Somebody on Facebook is asking, how is that not taking away access? If we're not making it harder for someone to get an abortion in a particular area, like what's the point?
Well, the point is that the abortion industry, one day, I mean, the fact that they were looking at Wascom, Texas at one point, some people would say, we never thought there would be an abortion facility in our city. And then one day it came there. And it's not something that once an abortion facility opened up and started doing abortions, it's a completely different discussion there, because then you would be taking away abortion access. But right now, all you're doing is preserving the status quo. And I think we all, if we really think about it, in certain cities, I mean, there are people in Gary, Texas, that never thought they would have a Dollar General pop up in their city of 312 people. There are people that never thought a medical clinic would be going in New Home, Texas, population a little over 300. So we never really know what is coming to our cities, right? And maybe an abortion facility would come to a city, like Whiteface, for instance. Whiteface, population 449 in West Texas. West Texas, that city of Whiteface, and that's a cattle term, okay. But in that area, there was a woman who was talking about opening up a women's clinic, and she said she would love to see abortion access in Whiteface, Texas. Well, majority of the people there, they didn't want to see anything like that come into their city. And so they wanted to make sure that they put something on the books. And a lot of this is tied to their religious beliefs. The passage that the Lord laid on my heart that really drove me into this whole scenario is Amos 5:15, which says to hate evil, to love good, and to establish justice within the city gates. And perhaps the Lord, the God of hosts, be gracious on the remnant of Joseph. I see abortion as an evil thing. I see it as the intentional killing of innocent human beings made in the image of God. And a lot of these cities see it the same way.
I realize we got a little sidetracked, and you have more quiz questions for him,
I
don't you?
do. Yeah. I mean, so when reading the ordinance that Evan was kind enough to send me the HuffPo article, which wasn't very fair to you. But
I
in
think that
reading the
writer did a great job. She was really sweet. We hung out quite a bit, and even though I disagree with what she said, I do think she did a fair job. Even though I disagree with some of the statements, and I'm really appreciative being willing to have this discussion because I'm enjoying this.
Oh yeah.
This is civil. This is something, and when I'm down in Houston sometime, I'd love to let's do a cheeseburger sometime, hang out, and buy you a beer. So
there we go. I look forward to it. Thank you.
We'll try to link to that Huffington Post article in the notes to the website. But if you Google Mark Lee Dixon HuffPo, it'll come right up. Yeah.
So in reading the ordinance, I could tell that it was, or I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I like to pretend I am in my spare time. It did seem like you were trying to keep it within the confines of the undue burden in Casey. However, in 2016 in Whole Women's Health, the Supreme Court decided that the Texas abortion law that was on the books did create an undue burden. That was the one where they required abortion clinics to have hallways the same length as surgical centers, that doctors needed to have admitting privileges at a local hospital. That wasn't anything like restricting access within city limits. Yet the Supreme Court still found, a conservative Supreme Court at the time, I mean, it's 5-4, but they still ruled in favor of Whole Women's Health and against Texas, declaring that law unconstitutional. So if Whole Women's Health didn't create sanctuary cities, yet the Supreme Court found that it did place an undue burden on women, how is this different?
Well, we're talking about apples and oranges here. We're talking about in a situation like Fort Worth, they have an abortion facility already. But we're talking about cities that don't currently have an abortion facility. Now, there can be a version of the ordinance that can be passed in a city with an abortion facility, but that's a different type of ordinance. But these 18 cities in the state of Texas that have passed ordinances outlawing abortion,
I was going to ask you that. Thank you.
Those are cities that don't currently have an abortion facility, and they want to keep it that way. They don't want an abortion facility in their community. And on that note, am I not doing the abortion industry a favor? Am I not showing them where they're not really wanted? And then the cities that vote down this ordinance and reject this ordinance, they're going to be welcome there, right? So I'm actually showing them where they're welcome and where they're not welcome.
A quick question. When the ordinances are passed, is that through an election process, or is that, I know the HuffPo article, that was the city council, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And it is through the city council. And so the citizens elect those people to make decisions and pass laws for that community. And so if they're capable of passing laws on different healthcare issues in their community, they can take care of this as well. This is a city issue.
Okay. Can I ask, has Wascom as a city faced any legal reaction to what they did? Were they sued, for example?
Absolutely. So 7 of the cities in East Texas were sued. At the time, 12 cities had passed the ordinance, the largest being Big Spring in West Texas. But Big Spring wasn't sued. 7 of the cities in East Texas were sued, and they weren't really.
By who?
They were sued. It was a lawsuit brought by the ACLU, but the Lilith Fund out of Austin and the T Fund out of Dallas were the ones behind that lawsuit. They didn't go after the actual ban on abortion. They went after kind of the outlying parts of the ordinance, and that was brought in February of 2020. And we looked at their claims. We really didn't see any weight to those claims. However, we decided to, for the sake of clarity, we put in lines of clarity in the ordinances. We amended them. We even made the Wascom ordinance stronger on outlawing abortion. And 3 months later, in May of 2020, the ACLU withdrew their lawsuit. Now, both sides claimed victory, but I saw that as a victory on our side because they had the opportunity to amend their lawsuit and go after the actual ban on abortion. They didn't do it. So abortion remains banned in these cities. And so we see that as a victory, and it has only encouraged more cities to go forward. Plus, in that process, it didn't cost the cities 1 cent because they were represented at no cost to city taxpayers by Jonathan F. Mitchell, the former Solicitor General for the state of Texas.
I'm wondering if, and maybe this is where you were going anyway next, but a couple people on Facebook have talked about the separation of church and state, or reacting to you talking about certain cities having religious beliefs. And I wonder if maybe there's a need to just talk about the actual morality of this. Like if it's just a church issue, right? Is it just church people being cranky, or is there something larger at play here? And I know we're talking about all the legalities, but I think people might want to hear both of you talk a little bit about what are your moral convictions on either side of this? I mean, you said at the beginning you think it's murder of unborn children.
Absolutely.
I'm assuming innocent. Yeah. I don't know if maybe you guys can speak to that some, because I think that's kind of the first step, right?
Yeah, because we probably all agree that municipalities could keep strip clubs out. We already agreed on that, right? So yeah, so I think at some point there's got to be what makes this issue different beyond the fact that the Supreme Court has ruled on it, because the Supreme Court has ruled against itself, right?
Right.
I mean, Dred Scott and Plessy versus Ferguson and all that. So okay, but I don't know who wants to go first on that. But
Would you mind?
Sure. So I believe abortion's murder. These have been a great impact on my life. These are 12-week fetal models. These are medical grade. If you take a picture of this and you put it on Facebook, Facebook would actually ask you, which friend do you want to tag? And I've taken a number of women to early view ultrasound and long view, and I've seen their baby on that screen. And it is amazing what our technology is able to do these days, that we can see not just 2D ultrasounds, but 3D and 4D ultrasounds. And the picture of that baby's face on that ultrasound, once you look at the baby as the baby's came out of the womb and you compare that ultrasound picture, you can tell that that's that baby that was in the womb, that the face is the same, that you can already recognize that child outside the womb based on the picture of the ultrasound. And I think that's incredible, that we are dealing with human beings here. And so the taking of that life, that innocent life made in the image of God, that God is knit together in the womb, I think it is murder for us to get involved in that process and stop the knitter. At Books A Million, there would be this, when I'd work there years ago, there'd be this knitting group. And towards the time of closing every night, it was one of the most difficult things to go up to those little old ladies knitting and saying, guys, you're going to have to stop knitting. But even more so, the idea of saying to the creator of the universe who knits us in our mother's womb that he has to, that we're interrupting his knitting. I just think that's a great disaster.
Well, I mean, I guess I feel the need to state that I do not think abortion is murder. I'm not sitting here advocating for murder.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just not in my wheelhouse. I have sat with someone while they had to watch the sonogram before getting an abortion, because that was the Texas law.
Hmm.
And sat with her and saw that. However, I think for me, it comes down to science. I am against third trimester abortions. That's when a baby can live outside the womb without assistance. When it's just a small grouping of cells, and I don't wish to, I'm not a biologist, so I don't wish to get into the weeds too much on the science of it. That's just where I've landed personally. Just to put the baby murderer thing to bed. Because that's not how I choose to see it. As well, this gets to another point, so hopefully we can twain the.
Can I ask you a couple clarifying questions? Just because I think people listening might ask these, or at least these are the ones I would ask if
Sure
I
thing.
were listening and could type them in. When you say third trimester, you're against because the baby's viable outside. You have to admit that just 50 years ago, that the number has changed in the last
Sure.
50 years. So as we back that number up, will you also back up when you think abortion would be wrong?
Me personally, probably.
Yeah. So that's
Um,
kind of the cutoff for you.
Right. Now I'm also, this is just a little aside, so please indulge me. Yeah, Ireland had a constitutional ban against abortion, and they just recently overturned that popularly. What I found so utterly fascinating through that electoral campaign to get that was both sides struggled with men, that men saw it wholly as not their place. And there were both conservatives and liberals that said, you have got to vote for either side. And it was a real push to get men to even consider it, because it's something they would never have to consider themselves.
Yeah.
I
Sadly, they should be considering it themselves. But
I
yeah.
mean, I guess. So I have a complicated relationship with abortion in that I will never ever have to make that decision
Right.
myself.
Right.
And I am gay, so I'm never going to get a phone call telling me that someone's knocked up.
Yeah.
I found a workaround, but thank you for laughing at that. But
Can I challenge that point right now?
That he's gay?
yeah,
No,
I mean
no.
that I'm
joking,
not
I'm
that I'm not
joking.
going to move on.
No, like the
God hated me that way.
the abortion facility in Shreveport, Louisiana, they have advertised that abortion is not just for women, but it's also for men as well. And the abortion industry is starting to say that abortion is not just for women, but for men too. And so it seems like there's two different messages being relayed in the industry. And so is there conflict there? Do you?
So I will only push back on the phraseology first, is that abortion facilities or industries, I prefer the term women's healthcare, given the fact that most of these clinics don't exclusively traffic in abortion. Planned Parenthood reaches out to men quite a bit through their STI training, through giving, through PrEP, through AIDS education, through being a healthcare giver of last resort for many men. So I would just say I would find it odd if an abortion facility was saying that it's for men. However, I would argue that healthcare and women's healthcare by extension would be for men. So I would draw that distinction, that I believe if you're in a married relationship, perhaps a discussion about abortion should loop the man in, as well as if you got pregnant out of wedlock, perhaps that might be a conversation you wish to have with the man. But in terms of the decision itself, that is exclusively to the woman, is how I see it.
Well, and I think what the abortion facility in Shreveport was implying there was that those in the transgender community who identify as a man may have an abortion. And so that's what I was saying, is that there seems to be two different narratives going on that seem to switch depending on which argument they're trying to make. In the issue of the transgender community, they will say that abortion is for men too, but in the non-transgender community, they will say that no vagina, no opinion.
Sure. And I definitely disagree with no vagina, no opinion, given the fact that I'm here, because I could just be sitting at home. Um, I am glad to hear that you support transgendered rights, though. That's nice.
I'm not saying I do.
Oh,
So that
okay.
may be a different debate. So
Yeah, absolutely. One I would love to have.
Can I go back though, because I do think it's very important on this question. So you had mentioned, Dylan, you'd mentioned earlier the kind of cellular argument, right? Like there's a certain number of cells, et cetera. And in between that and like third trimester, is what, like 26 weeks or so. Mark held up a 12-week. Do you have that fetal model? I have about a dozen of those as well. And when I do student outreach, I have those in my hand as well. That's 12 weeks. So
Allegedly. I mean, the HuffPo article did mention that was
like
not
exaggerated.
anatomically correct.
Okay.
So you don't think that would be an anatomical? Okay, well,
I'm not a doctor.
Let's say it's 18 weeks. Let's say it's pre-viability.
Yeah.
Right?
For the sake of argument.
Pre-viability.
Yeah.
But I mean, so in Mark, in Texas, you can get abortion up to 20 weeks, right?
well, a little bit later than that, occasionally, but yes.
Okay, so let's just call it 20 weeks. So if that's 12 weeks, let's just call it 20 weeks. I mean, that's more than cells. You would have to agree.
Sure. But yet not viable outside of the body.
Okay.
But just as a mom, my kids weren't particularly viable even once they were born. I mean, I'm not saying that just to be kind of a smart aleck. Like, they required everything. Like, if we had just left them there, they would die the same way they would have a day before they were born. I mean, had they been born, you know what I mean? So that has always kind of confused me. Like, viability. I mean, my gosh, like they're still learning some of those things. They're teenagers, but to me, there has to be something beyond viability to the conversation. And it's interesting that bioethicists have no atheist, Christian, and everything in between have no problem saying, oh, this is human life for sure from fertilization. It's the rest of us that are kind of, creeping behind going, well, where's the line? I just think viability is a funny line, but I'm not in the debate. I'm supposed to just be moderating. So I'm going to be quiet.
Well, earlier you had mentioned science, and every biology, I know you said you didn't want to get into biology of things, but every biology textbook, I remember when I was in 7th grade, looking at the even 7th grade, and even when I was in high school, specifically in 9th grade, I remember looking at the biology textbook in Coach Brown's class at White Oak, and it said that life began at conception, and that's what the biology textbook said. And I don't think the biology textbook was trying to push religion on me. I think it was being honest with what the facts were, that life began at the point of conception, and that Coach Brown would always say that all of us, from the moment of conception, have our own unique DNA, and that's something that a sheriff in one of these cities recently said at over in Grapeland, Texas, at that council meeting. He said that all of us have unique fingerprints, and those come from when we're in our mother's womb, and that's how they identify people, by their fingerprints. And here we have unborn children having fingerprints, and that shows unique identity. And so we see those things on my side as scientific proof that so many people in the world are ignoring. How do you deal with those things? How do you deal with the fact that when you look at this and you say, what is this? I mean, is this a human being or is it not? If it's not a human being with 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, 2 ears, 2 arms, 10 fingers, then what is it?
Well, as I said, I am not a bioethicist or a doctor, and I don't believe any of us are. I would love to have a conversation at some point, maybe when we get a cheeseburger, about how that textbook came to say that. I have an awful lot of opinions about how textbooks are written in Texas and how that process goes. I do believe that they are pushing an agenda. Don't get me started on the history books that Texas has just put into schools. which almost completely ignore Jeff. Sorry. We can.
We probably agree about this a lot,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah, continue though.
We can discuss that later.
But it's
I
not
would
just
love that.
biology, high school biology textbooks. I
Right.
think it's like medical school textbooks as well.
I mean,
you know,
every person
look,
that gives an abortion is a doctor.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that they're not violating their own oath that they took. I mean, I guess if
They wouldn't see it that way.
for me, when I talk to people about this question, and I don't want to, I'm trying not to pile on, but I do think it's so imperative to answer. Like the question is, so for you, you would say viability.
Mm.
That's when something, a being in the womb, gains rights.
Sure.
Okay. And so my argument is always that I think that's just as arbitrary a time as any other, right?
Okay.
Because the day before, there's nothing substantially biologically different. There's nothing different about that child in any way. But maybe we haven't talked much about the kind of economics of this.
That's exactly where I was heading.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Because one thing that I have a severe level of distaste is that I think it's important to define the difference between existing and living. That a lot of anti-choice folks seem to be really into the existence of that baby, which I get. However, a life, the economic aspects of it, which can also circle back to what Sarah was saying earlier, that someone had commented about restricting abortion access, that in many cases, this seems to exclusively penalize poor women. That way before Roe versus Wade, going back to the Victorian era, women did not struggle to procure an abortion if they wanted one, if they had money. You either had to go through non-legal means, whatever. But here in America, we have the least generous social safety net in the developed world. And we don't have universal health care, which I'm not trying to argue in favor of, although I am in favor of it. But the lack of universal health care means we also have the lack of universal access to health care. That in England and Germany and France, they don't have to worry about how close they are to the nearest hospital. If the pandemic has shown us anything, it's that these rural areas in Iowa and North Dakota that was so hard hit, it's because several times they lived 600 miles away from the nearest hospital. That is a tragedy for rural America. It's also a tragedy for folks that live in the third ward, that although the abortion clinic's right up the road, the access to it could be restricted as well. The Huffington Post article had a fascinating little map I played with last night that showed Big Spring, Texas, and showed how close the abortion clinics were to them in 2012 and 2020. And of course, that number vastly decreased, in large part because of the Texas abortion law that was struck down by the Supreme Court in Whole Women's Health versus Texas. That for me, I struggled to see why so many of us seem to lose that deep care and importance for this life once the umbilical cord is severed. That it's a 16-year-old girl who made a mistake and got knocked up, and now she must live with that for the next 18 years. She must try and raise a child she did not want, is ill-equipped to take care of, and in many cases that breeds resentment that just keeps that cyclical form of you and I bonded over earlier that I work for Barnes & Noble and you used to work for Books A Million, so we're book bros.
Absolutely.
And if January 6th taught me anything, it's that it's always good to be as completely accurate as you can be. And so I brought a couple books, and I just want to read to you a quote and then kind of ask you about it, if that would be all right.
Absolutely.
So this is Jimmy Carter in 1977. This book is called White Trash. It's by Nancy Eisenberg. It's wonderful. It's the untold history of class in America. So Carter was asked about access to abortion, and his response was this: well, as you know, there are many things in life that are not fair, that wealthy people can afford and poor people can't. But I don't believe that the federal government should take action to try to make these opportunities exactly equal when there's a moral factor involved. And so, what I take from that is wealthy people are more than welcome to go and get abortions because they're wealthy and can pull that off, whereas poor women must just deal with it. And that's where, so while some listeners, and hopefully not some of y'all, but I'd understand, may think that I'm just, a murderer.
No one thinks that.
Well, I mean, and it's worth noting, I have in fact taken someone to an abortion clinic to get one, and in fact paid for it myself, because not because it was mine, but because I just could not get behind the idea of a 17-year-old girl ruining her life. That her parents were not going to be helpful. She had all of these plans and has graduated college and is a teacher now. Things which she would have not been able to accomplish had she had the child. And for me at least, it seems like the anti-choice movement seems very concerned about children right until the umbilical cord is severed. And then after that, you're on your own.
That's something I hear a lot, Mark, that
Mhm.
the pro-life position.
So I'd
only
love
cares
for you to
about-
rebut
yeah.
that. Yes.
Well,
That was phrased as a statement. It meant to be a question. I'm sorry.
I understand. So let me tackle the aspect of life in general and the whole idea of, we don't care about people once the umbilical cord is cut. Uh, I spend a lot of time over the past several years. I've spent a lot of time not just uh, outside of abortion facilities, but also just walking through the whole process with women, and even been in the hospital, different hospitals, fighting for the lives of those who are medically vulnerable, like a 39-year-old Jonathan Michael, who was at a hospital in Tyler, Texas, and his estranged wife wanted to pull the plug. We stepped in and saved his life, and now he's learning to walk again. He's getting to eat pizza with his son. He's alive because we care from the point of conception to natural death. And I think we've got to, across the board, do everything we can to fight for the life of all people. And when we're talking about the unborn child in the womb, the economic circumstances surrounding that child is not worth ending that child's life. In your arguments, a lot of those points that you brought up, well, you know who once made those arguments? The slave owners made those arguments at one time, saying that if slavery were to end, then it would cost them so much. And so we don't need to use these same arguments for unborn children. We should learn our lesson. We should learn that all human beings, regardless of their background, regardless of how small they are or how strong they are, that they deserve equal protection. And when I see the images, when I see the reality that we're learning more and more about life in the womb.
But what about the 18-year-old with no money, no resources, unsupportive boyfriend, unsupportive parents, walking to Hope Medical Clinic in Shreveport, centenary freshman, if anyone can afford that anymore. What do you do? What do you say to that person?
Well,
she's not going to be able to care for that child.
I'll tell you what I said to one particular woman. I reached out and I said, "My name's Mark. I'm from Longview, Texas, and I want you to know that this is not God's will for your life. That God has a plan and a purpose for you and that child, and you just need to trust in the Lord with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and not rely on your own understanding, but acknowledge the Lord, and He will direct your path. If there's anything that we need to help you out, if you need food, clothing, a place to live, we're here to help you. The Church of Jesus Christ is willing to help you and this child." She came over and talked to me, and the conversation was going forward, and I said, um, "How many children do you have?" And she said, "I've got 3 girls." And I said, "Is that counting the one in your womb?" And she said, "No, this will be the 4th child." And immediately my heart just sank, and I pictured her whole situation: single mother, 3 girls. You already know where this is going, right? She doesn't have room for another child in her life because you got 3 young girls in the back of her car. You can't put a newborn in the front seat. Her car's too small. So I said to her, "We can help you get a bigger car." Because when your car's too small, you don't get an abortion, you get a bigger car. And I think it's the role of the church to do everything they can to be a loud voice for women, that we are here to help. And I think we need to encourage all women. I think abortion is a depowering message for women. I think the most empowering message for women that we can share on the sidewalk at an abortion clinic is that they can be a great mother to that child. And I think we as churchmen need to do everything we can to support them being those great mothers that they can be.
But again, like a new car, which is very kind. I commend you for doing that, for putting your money where your mouth is. One thing I've admired about Catholics, especially, that they've been in the anti-abortion game way longer than any evangelical has. I would point to the Southern Baptist Convention in 1984, which still had abortion support in its platform. Yeah, they were rather late and considered quite disingenuous by Catholics for a very long time. But they put their money where their mouth is. Now, if I owned the Vatican, I could too. But they have support homes for people. They have our churches in a position to help every woman who wants an abortion, and not just in one way, because the new car is wonderful, but that is a whole other mouth to feed. That's 4 mouths that a single mom has to feed. It seems to be condemning them to being stuck in a cycle of poverty that from which they cannot escape.
But when we talk about something like rights, human rights, don't we have to begin with the most basic of rights? I mean, isn't the most basic of rights the right to live?
Sure, but
So, I
we
mean, it's
are
like-
we already litigated that you and I disagree on where life begins.
Yeah.
So, and I only say that to say we can only talk so far before we just are staring at a chasm. So that's why I'm just trying to redirect it to now that we have that it goes before Amy Coney Barrett does exactly what she was put there to do, and abortion is gone now. We are just like Poland. Is the Church of Jesus Christ in a position to step in and help every woman who would otherwise seek an illegal abortion, or wealthy women who would otherwise fly to England and get an abortion, or Canada, or Mexico?
Whether
Would you go ahead, Mark?
whether the church is in that position right now, they need to get there. And that's why when I go across the state of Texas and even other states, I speak in churches. I encourage them to get involved in the battle. And I see some incredible things happening in Grapeland, Texas. There's a pastor there that said, now that we've passed this ordinance, what can we do to help our city take care of these women in our community? How can we team up with the different organizations? Can how can the church locally, uh, um, whether it's housing the diapers and the baby formula in the community, or whether it's providing scholarships, there's so many different things, and we got to be creative. I think to see a problem and um, to take the way out of just snuffing out a life, I don't think that's the solution. I think the real challenge is, we've got a life here. What can we do to support this life and the mother raising it? Because abortion has a lot of negative effects to the woman. It increases the risk of breast cancer. It increases the risk of suicide. And I have dealt with women who are regretting their decision of a past abortion. And it's a horrible thing. I have a friend who committed suicide over a past abortion. And it, I just don't see encouraging abortion access as a loving thing to do, because I think having a child, that's one of the greatest gifts out there. That motherhood is one of the greatest gifts that God gives.
And which I agree. I just also don't. Okay, let's. So now we've talked about after the womb, or after they exit the womb. I want to go back before we even have little cells, or a spiritual dwelling within the womb. How do we feel about contraceptives, condoms, and sex education?
Well, on the subject of, just to be clear, the sanctuary cities for the unborn ordinances, they do not regulate condoms.
Which I
not.
did take note of, and so that
Right.
was a question I wanted to ask: was, are you in favor of that?
Well, life begins at the point of conception. And so these ordinances see it as such. Until the sperm and the egg unite, there's not life there. I do not see the individual sperm as life. It's the sperm and the egg coming together that point we have life.
So you wouldn't
And
sign
so,
on to that Georgia law that was proposed that would try men for, I think it was manslaughter for every hmm,
What's
emission,
PG-13? Yeah.
made without the presence of another individual.
well,
So we wouldn't go that far.
I would see
Huh?
that as unscientific. I mean, no biology book that I've read says that life begins before conception. It's always
Sure.
life begins at
That
conception.
was
And
an intentionally mocking law. Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
However, I mean, I get the point. Right. No, and of course it wouldn't pass. That gets to my thought of. I feel if men could get pregnant, you could get an abortion at an airport. But
By the way, we are kind of in the out of time range.
Terribly
so-
sorry.
No. But if there are some last thoughts or something you really wanted to get to, I want to make sure we allow time for that. So we're at an hour now. But yeah, is there either of you have something you feel like, man, that was not addressed, and I really wanted to say something about it?
No, not for me.
I have a question just from sort of the skeptics side of things. Is why not take all the energy that's going toward creating these sanctuary cities for the unborn and put it into, say, like CareNet pregnancy centers or places like that, where they're offering the kind of resources that I think Dylan and others would like to see. And we haven't even talked about adoption, but like pointing people in the direction of adoption resources or helping them with these lifelong, from diapers to, filling out college scholarship information. I mean, all that kind of stuff. Why not take this energy and put it there?
well, the people in these cities believe that this was something they needed to do, that they felt, many of them have said they felt led by God to vote yes on these ordinances. And if God leads someone to outlaw abortion in their community, who are we to question that? And I have seen time and time again, there was a situation out of one of the cities where uh, one of the council members said that she was going to vote yes on this ordinance, but she just wanted everyone to know that if anyone there found themselves in a position where they could not take care of a child or did not want their child, that she'd be willing to adopt that child. I kid you not, within 3 days, a knock at her door at 10:30 at night, and she adopted a child. And
That's very cool. I love that.
I don't know how God is going to use these ordinances in every city, but I know that when you stand on the word of God, when you stand on your belief and your convictions, and you say that this is not going to be something that's welcomed in the community, that God is going to use that. And that's the whole spirit of where this whole thing began, to hate evil, to love good, to establish justice within your city gates, and perhaps the Lord, the God of hosts, be gracious on the remnant of Joseph. I don't know how many lives have been saved from this action. I know there's lives have been saved. I know that there are high school students who have seen their city do this, and that discussion has come up, and lives have been saved as a result. So I just think we got to trust in the Lord, and if He leads our cities to outlaw abortion, I think we should do it.
Okay, Dylan, get the last word, and we'll close it out.
Dear me. Alrighty. Well, we didn't get to touch on it too much, and I would love to. I fully intend on taking you up on your offer if you ever
Absolutely.
breeze through Houston. I just feel it's important that every pro-choice person I've ever met is not thrilled by the idea of an abortion. It's not anything we would want to see happen as a first line of defense. That's why I wish we could have discussed more about contraceptives and sex education in schools, condoms, all of that. Because I think everyone that is in favor of abortion is in favor of less abortions. I think they should be accessible. I think they should be, because again, it's the law. But I don't think they should be common. They should be safe. They should be rare. And I think a lot of that comes from, or will have to come from, our churches as well. Like, rather than just focusing exclusively on the unborn child, we should focus on what happens before and what happens after. It's done my heart good to hear that you are taking steps towards taking care of the children that will result from these. I hope to see more of it from my evangelical friends as well.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us on Facebook Live. Dylan Cumberland. People can find you on Facebook if they want.
Yeah, sure now.
All right. So if they like or didn't like something you said, Dylan Cumberland on Facebook.
Shoot me a message.
And shoot him a message. Don't shoot him. Just shoot him a message. Okay.
Oh my
All
gosh.
right. And Mark Lee Dixon, Sanctuary Cities for the Unborn, I think would be where he would want you to go. Yes. And you're on Facebook as well. And you
Right.
probably have your load of friends, but maybe you can follow him and interact with him there. So, well, we're going to head out. Thanks for watching us again on Facebook. And until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.